be 10 years since Sandra Day O'Connor's
Interestingly,
decision.
that line by Sandra Day O'Connor that she thinks using racial preferences to advance the concept of diversity won't be necessary 25 years from now has made many people go, what will be different in 25 years? Why is diversity something you must force today? So I think that debate's going to be interesting because most people think affirmative action is about readdressing racial grievances. But now it's about the concept of diversity. And Buck, you make an important point. Sandra Day O'Connor is gone, replaced by Justice Alito. Chief Justice John Roberts has shown some antipathy or some reluctance on affirmative action.
Kennedy's shown it willing. He's never shown that he wants affirmative action to be upheld.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see affirmative action completely overturned.
They could put a stake in the heart of this thing. I think it's very possible.
But I looked at this in terms of this particular case, affirmative action, and wondered if this is going to come up in the presidential election and in the debates. It may not this Wednesday. The debate is focused on the economy and healthcare and governance. However, will Mitt Romney be a Republican of a generation who's very uncomfortable with this topic, if he's going to be able to address it forthrightly and persuasively? And when I was thinking about how would Mitt Romney address this, I think he could point out that he and President Obama both attended private school, as a matter of fact, and had the privilege of private school. And as a conservative, when I look at the affirmative action question, I think Republicans need to address it on the other end, which is what are we doing in terms of primary and secondary and high school education so that affirmative action is not necessary to try to give some of our citizens a leg up. But you know, as a political matter, I'm going to be very curious to see how Mitt Romney responds.
To enable him to sort of lead into a school choice reform, the educational system argument. I think it has the potential to really change whatever happens here, will change how colleges around the country do business and who they accept, and it could really change the face of what the student body looks like on campuses around the country. So I'm interested to see how it turns out. But I agree with you. I think for Mitt Romney to make that argument successfully, he needs to make it a broader argument and sort of branch it out.
Jenna, California is a particularly interesting case because they decided as a state to just eliminate racial preferences in their college system. And that has been the law of the land for some years there. So this has been done before, it just hasn't been done at a federal level.
And then what about gender? Then does that sort of branch out?
Well, we've got some others issues that are coming from the Supreme Court that are no less controversial, and another one that deals with race, and that's voting rights. So the Supreme Court hasn't yet agreed to hear cases on voting rights, and the constitutionality of the 1965 Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance. We've talked about it on the show many times, but Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Should certain states must they go before the Department of Justice to change any of their election laws? So these are states, and we actually have a map we can put up to show you some of who these Section 5 states are, but these are states that have a history in the 1960s or 70s of perhaps saying to African Americans, you know, you have to count the number of jelly beans in this jar in order to vote, and that dates back before the 60s, but doing things with election laws that seemingly would have no effect on race, but did to disenfranchise some voters. But these states, the argument is, are largely beyond those times. In fact, that's Chief Justice John Roberts saying the South has changed. So again, we could look at a situation where this concept of pre-clearance, that some states can't make changes to their election laws without going to the DOJ first, could be done away with.
When they decided a case in 2009 called Northwest Austin Utility District, this was an interesting setup because it was an 8-1 decision that this utility district, which did have some elections, shouldn't have to go to the Department of Justice if it wanted to move its polling place across the street. In that decision, though, it was 8-1. Two interesting things. One, Justice Thomas said, I'm not going with you guys on this because this whole thing should be thrown out, talking about Section 5. So we already know there's one justice who looks like he's done with this whole thing. And the other component of it was interesting is they told Congress in that decision, you better figure this thing out. You better handle this. This was back in 2009 because exactly what you said, Will, this law was passed at a time when the facts on the ground were different. And to say that they haven't changed now is to ignore reality, and we're in a different period. So they actually, I think, there's a possibility they could get rid of this, but I'm not as sure as I'm with the affirmative action.
Well, and as we've discussed at this table, it seems that this voting, the pre-clearance is being asked for to address not Jim Crow consequences and the effect on African Americans, but Hispanic voters. So these states are being caught in this voting rights sort of net for a completely different population that the Voting Rights Act was not designed to be trying to redress.
Well, we know how big the issue of voting rights is, and as it's been termed on the left, voter suppression is in this election. It's something we heard about from the Democratic National Convention. I guarantee you we're going to hear about it during the presidential debate. So this debate is one that's certainly integral to this this election. And Buck, I would say this, one caveat, that Northwest Austin case, the Supreme Court ran away from dealing away from the Section 5 case.
They didn't touch it.
I don't know if they're going to touch it this time.
Absolutely true, but they told Congress, get your house in order. That was a few years ago because they wanted to sort of respect the process. The process has not been respected, and what we've seen since 2009 is a bunch of cases on voter ID that go right to the heart of this issue, because voter ID in the Indiana case was held constitutional. The state has a compelling interest in people proving who they are at the polling place, but under Section 5, they have to prove pre-clearance.
So a state like Texas couldn't have a voter ID law where Indiana could.
Exactly.
Let's touch on the last potential issue, which could be big before the Supreme Court. Again, they haven't agreed to hear this case, these types of cases yet, but it's same-sex marriage. They could have before them the Defense of Marriage Act, a 1996 federal law that denies federal benefits like joint filing tax returns or Social Security death benefits to same-sex married couples in states like Massachusetts and such that have approved gay marriage. Along with that, the Supreme Court could agree to look at Proposition 8, the California law that said marriage should be between a man and a woman. So this is another one that could come before the Supreme Court and could have big election consequences if it comes up before the election.
This, I think, will come up primarily because Barack Obama came out and said, I support gay marriage. I think that's something also that you're going to see debate moderators latch onto. They like social issues. You often see that repeated in all the elections, so I think this will be a big one.
Well, and in the larger context,